We're back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to go back to a segment that we talked about yesterday. Not so much on the result of the Eagles and Carolina game. Obviously, the Eagles won, but it was very close in the end. But they still won the game, and not all wins are created equal, right? Because obviously, a win is great if you're beating a team by like 21 points, and you obviously played great. But then you got the wins like yesterday where there was a real possibility that the Panthers could have won that game if not for an Xavier Legette drop that really cost them the game, or was part of it. The one play didn't cost them the game, but regardless of that, the Eagles won in a very close game, despite the fact, obviously, the differences in the team and the trajectories and everything like that. But, that wasn't what was all taken away from yesterday, because yesterday we talked about how the Eagles won, but also what transpired afterwards when A.J. Brown talked to the media, and there was a pretty awkward moment with A.J. and the way he responded to some of the questions. Also, what Jalen Hurts said, looking and kind of assuming he felt pretty annoyed as well after the game based on the passing offense that we saw on display yesterday. And I'll find the stats here quickly, but on what AJ Brown said yesterday, the media asked AJ what he thought the offense what he thought the offense needed to improve on after a game like that. And AJ Brown had a pretty quick remark, but to kind of give you guys some context if you didn't know, yesterday in terms of passing offense, Jalen Hurts only threw for 108 yards, 2 touchdowns, and AJ Brown was the leading receiver with only four receptions and 43 receiving yards. Devontae Smith only had 37 yards and also 4 receptions. So not great numbers, obviously, for two guys of that caliber. So they asked A.J. Brown what he thought the offense needed to improve on after the game. And all A.J. Brown said was passing. They needed to improve on passing. That's all A.J. Brown said, with kind of a sarcastic, kind of tone to it. So obviously, when you hear that, you think right away it's a shot at Jalen. He's not happy with Jalen. There could be some friction there. That's the first thing people think of, obviously, when you say something like that, because who is controlling the passing game? It's obviously the quarterback. He has the ball every single time that the ball is snapped. So if you're saying that the passing game needs improvement, then the quarterback needs improvement, obviously, right? Because he dictates everything. And to that note, Jalen Hurts was also a little bit annoyed after the game when he was also asked some questions by the media, obviously, and he was asked if he felt there needed to be some conversations or just some talks about being on the same page, and whether he thought having those conversations this late in the season, was appropriate, or, that there should be those conversations this late in the season. To which all he said was no. He said no, and then he refused to say anything afterwards, with a bit of a sarcastic laugh as well. So already you're kind of feeling a little bit of tension there, just because it's not how you would react when you win a game. Of course, you should have beaten this team by at least 2 or maybe even 3 scores, obviously, with an 11-2 record now, and the Panthers at 3-10. But there is that bit of, there could be some friction here. Then we get to the main part of this with Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham yesterday, he has a weekly radio show, sports radio, on 94 WIP in Philadelphia, I'm assuming. He usually has it on Monday night, and he was asked about the exchange pretty directly, and he did not mince words. He didn't hold back anything, and he just said what he thought. And, it's fair, but in hindsight, it's probably not the best way to go about this situation. But what Brandon Graham said was, the person that's complaining needs to be accountable. I don't know the whole story, but I know that 1 is trying, and 11 could be a little better with how he responds to things. 1 referencing Jalen Hurts, and 11 referencing A.J. Brown. He continued by saying, they were friends before this, but things have changed, and I understand that because life happens. But it's the business side that we have to make sure the personal doesn't get in the way of business. So, pretty direct. I highlighted 2 things on on my sheet that really just stuck out from his statement, and I'll get to it. But before I react to it, Brandon Graham did walk back on his comments, just today, I'm assuming. And I don't have the full quote just for time purposes, but I do have some of the quotes where he said he made a mistake. He assumed that it was something that it wasn't. He said that he had it all wrong. And he said also that I want brothers to be able to just hash things out. Paraphrasing what he said in his, I guess, apology or just retracting this statement that he said on Monday night. But the initial reactions to what Brandon Graham said, first is it's just a pretty crazy, unexpected thing to say. He started the whole thing off by saying, I don't know the whole story. So the fact that he gave acknowledgement that he doesn't really have all the information should have kind of, I don't know, maybe stopped him a little bit, or maybe had him reconsider what he was going to say. I don't really know, because he says, I don't really know the whole story, but he goes on to say that they were friends before this. But then he talks about Jalen Hurts and the fact that he's trying, to go out there and play well, and how A.J. Brown could do a better job at how he responds to things. So the fact that he said he doesn't know the whole story, but then making a claim like they were friends, I mean, he's in the locker room, I'm assuming, a lot, so he would know that kind of information, but he started it off by kind of prefacing that he doesn't know exactly what happened. So to make a claim like that is pretty, a pretty outlandish thing to say, for a lack of a better terms. Even if, you have that seniority and that familiarity in the locker room, still, I couldn't believe what he said, to just kind of air it all out like that. And as much as he apologized and things like that, which I thought was all right to do, and it was the right thing to do, obviously, but it's out there now. It's out there. Everyone saw it. Everyone's reacting to it. Everybody makes their own interpretations of what you said, regardless if you feel bad about it or you try to retract your statement. It's already out there, so you can't make people kind of forget or unhear what you said. So in that same breath, I think what A.J. Brown said, being pretty cryptic and saying that the passing game needs to improve, you could also say that he didn't mean to make much of it, that, I'm sure if they ask him about it, which they probably will, he'll say that, he meant that it should be the entire offense, not just Jalen, obviously. But in that same breath, again, Brandon Graham sort of should have kind of walked back on his statement while he was saying it, maybe reconsidered and not use such direct words or, statement in the way that he said it. But much like that, A.J. Brown, I feel like, knowing what, the media is, obviously, and how people interpret things very differently, don't just give them the resources, the context to go at you and make their own speculations, right? By saying just that the passing game needs work, it's a pretty cryptic message, where I think Devontae Smith also talked about it, and they asked him about his frustrations, and he said that everybody just needs to get on the same page. We all just need to know the signals, and we just all need to get better. Something along those lines. So obviously Devontae Smith gets it. You don't have to be so direct with the media, obviously. And I think AJ, the fact that he just said passing because obviously he was frustrated, I don't think made the situation any better. And I think he was wrong for saying, just passing, knowing what the results would have been on the other side. But I'm not even, AJ could be mad and he could be frustrated. I don't even mind that. Just don't be so direct in giving the media this sort of, resource to go back at you and create a distraction, essentially, right? I don't even care that he shows it on the sidelines. He could slam his helmet. He could go over there and talk to Jalen Hurts pretty aggressively. But all of that is fine, because it's not like the media know exactly what you're saying. If they ask you about it, afterwards, you could just say, oh, we were talking about whatever, right? You can make anything up, and, for them to come to a conclusion after that, it would make it seem a lot less legitimate, because they don't truly know what you said or what was going on. They could pretty much assume, but when you say that, the passing game needs to improve, that's what this offense needs, the passing game. So that was also the way that he kind of handled it, being pretty cryptic, I don't think was right. much like I don't think Brandon Graham to kind of make a statement like this was pretty right also. All of these things could just be handled behind closed doors because you're an 11-2 team, right? If you're an 11-2 team, you don't need things like this to just pop up, right? You got the best offensive line, one of the best, if not the best offense, the best offensive player in Saquon Barkley, arguably the best wide receiver duo, one of the best defensive lines, a great secondary. You don't need to make problems for yourself, right? And if you don't think the media and all the questions are going to be about this exchange during a week where you got to prepare for the Steelers, you don't really know how this thing goes, right? All the questions and everything is going to be surrounding this, just creating another distraction for an 11-2 team that on those frustrations, you can understand it, going back to it just because you're trying to compete with the best of the best, with the Lions, with the Vikings, and things like that. So clearly, showing those frustrations is a competitive nature that you want, obviously, because you're striving for perfection. But again, at 11-2, all those things can be handled behind closed doors. At practice, at meetings, you could say whatever you want to each other there. But to air it out like this, I always think really turns out worse than it makes it a positive, outcome at the end of the day. So they don't need these distractions, right? And it makes me think also, like, they're not that they're fortunate that they're 11-2 because they're all great players. They're one of the most talented teams in the NFL. So a record like this is warranted. But could you imagine if this team was like 5-8 or like 7-6 and they were struggling? There was a lot of low points in the season. What kind of things would be coming out of that locker room when at 11-2, one game where the passing game maybe isn't, the greatest and it's kind of been building up. There's been some spurts of it here or there. And now you get this sort of reaction. Could you imagine if they've been struggling the entire season, what this locker room would have been like, what the exchanges would have been like? Maybe Nick Sirianni would have been fired at some point because at 11-2, not that everything should be perfect and everything like that, but it feels like this was a bit overblown, and they could have handled it better. So I think just going forward, they're in a great spot still. They're only a game behind of the Lions for the number 1 seed. So things like this, coming up in this game against the Steelers, one of two things are going to happen, right? When something like this happens for a good team like this, one, the next game against Pittsburgh, there's going to be no issue. The passing game is going to look great. A.J. Brown's going to get like 8 receptions, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns or something like that. And they're going to be smiling, laughing about it on the sideline like nothing happened. That's the ideal scenario for Philadelphia. But what could also happen could be that the Steelers play them close. A.J. Brown's still not getting the ball. The running game struggling. And A.J. and Jalen have some tense moments during the game, and if they lose the game also, it'll make it even worse. But it's something like that's going to happen, right? This is just going to be blown over. The Eagles are going to dominate, and A.J. Brown's going to have a great game. Or if the Steelers play it right, they could frustrate A.J. Brown, the passing game could be off, and they'll get in their own way rather than focusing on all the little things that they need to do against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are also in their own right 10-3 heading into this game. So this whole situation, which just kind of quickly picked up into this whole big issue that could have simply been avoided if, these comments wouldn't have been so direct. But we'll see how it goes. I don't think they're going to collapse or anything like that, but it's very odd to see an 11-2 team, have this interaction like they're 7-6 or something. So we'll see how it all plays out on Sunday. But I mentioned the Steelers there briefly, and we're going to go back to Sunday and talk about their game against the Cleveland Browns. They had a pretty dominant showing all in all, but we're going to try and answer the questions of their number 2 wide receiver. Is that a problem going forward based on what we saw and what we know going forward? And also looking ahead to 3 of their hardest games of the schedule coming up, starting with the Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll be right back with that topic right after this break.
Looking for